Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. EDINA Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, EDINA Eye offers comprehensive services for dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
And access to democracy returned. And we're very, very happy to have our representative in Congress, Angie Craig, the 2nd Congressional District, and she's just completing her first tour in Congress. And I have to say, Angie, what a couple of years you have had. Welcome.
Thank you, Alan. It's just a pleasure to be back to Access to Democracy.
Yeah, you haven't been on the show for a while, although you did do a very nice cameo on our anniversary show, which I appreciate. And I just don't know where to start with you with this interview, because I know, among other things, that you have been involved in about as much legislation or more than any other freshman member of Congress. You have had bills passed and presented to the president, although I don't know if he's ever signed them because I don't know where his crayon is. But in any event, it's such a pleasure to have you back. After the traumatic week that we've had here in Minnesota because of George Floyd's murder, and that's really what it was, which we actually witnessed on video. And on top of that, we have the coronavirus, which is certainly impacting us. And here you are dealing back and forth. I don't know if you're in Minnesota at the moment or you're in Washington.
I am coming to you live from Eagan here in my home office, Alan. And you're exactly right. It's been a tumultuous last couple of years in the Congress. A tumultuous last few days here in Minnesota as we deal with the murder of George Floyd, which, of course, yesterday he was memorialized by his family. And then we look at ourselves as a country and say, where are we? And what do we need to do to move forward? So there's so much we could say about it. I was sworn in 12 days into a government shutdown. We're now in the middle of a pandemic. We've passed a war powers resolution following some conflict with Iran. And we now have the tragedy of George Floyd and so many other Black Americans who have died when they shouldn't have. And so, I choose to look at my first term in Congress is an opportunity to make a difference, to make this country a little better, to help bring us back together. And that's what I'm going to keep working toward. And I can tell you that the piece of legislation I got passed and signed by the president, it was signed with a pen. And the liaison to the White House actually sent it to me afterward. But I do feel very proud of, in my first term in Congress, getting a bipartisan bill not only through the Congress, but to the president's desk and into law.
And there are not many freshmen, let alone many Democrats in the House who can say that. Because pretty much a lot of the legislation has reached the Senate and stopped dead in its tracks. I know there are a couple of hundred bills that have been passed by the House that Mitch McConnell hasn't even lifted his finger on yet, and some of them are very important. But yours did get signed, and kudos to you. It's got to be weird also because you're now running for re-election in a strange, strange way, because I know that what you do is get out and mix with the people. And with the coronavirus, that's got to be an inhibiting factor for you. And I know you have opposition. You have been targeted by the Republicans because you turned a red district blue. And I commend you on wearing your blue right now. And so tell us a little bit about what that's like.
Well, it's really interesting because the way I think about it is I'm reapplying for my job, Alan, and I really just tried to do this job as representative, and I take that word very seriously. Representative. This is something that means something to me. That means I need to be out in our community a lot. I've held 17 town halls. Obviously, the majority of those have been in person. All comers just show up. We don't check your driver's license to make sure you're even from the district, because I believe that's what democracy looks like. It's out, you're among your constituents, and you're listening to them. And even in our COVID-19 pandemic era, I've never been busier working with business owners to help them get SBA loans or a Paycheck Protection Program loan, working to change that program to make it work better for them. Today I was at Eastview High School meeting with the Black Honor Association as they gathered goods for South Minneapolis. And even in the pandemic, I was able to sort of form a semicircle outside and ask young Black Minnesotans who live in the suburbs, what do you want me to focus on as a member of Congress? And, that's what I've been doing this whole time. I've been listening to our constituents. I've been taking that back to Washington, and I've been turning that into legislation. Now, some legislation's harder to get across the finish line than others, but I'm really proud of the fact that over 2/3 of the legislation that I've written or co-sponsored as a member of Congress has been bipartisan. And the way that I got the bill signed into law by the president.
That's really the way you have worked though your entire career. And you're one of those who may be a progressive ideologue, but you also are pragmatic, and you also share with the other side of the aisle some of these innovative suggestions and ideas that you have, and it's been very fruitful. We get very good comments back from Republicans in the House about working with you, and that's really nice to see.
Well, thank you for that. I worked with Congressman Mark Meadows, who now is the president's chief of staff, in order to get the bill that we wrote that would prevent improper payments by government agencies and save taxpayers billions of dollars. So I'll work with anybody if it's a good idea. And I've proven that as a first-term member of Congress. But I do think we've got to somehow come back to it's fine if we have ideological differences, but demeaning one another, somehow making sure that the civility that we expect from our public leaders comes back into Minnesota's experience with our elected leaders. And I, for one, am just going to continue to do what we're doing, which is take care of everybody in this district best we can. And we'll let that record of working with anyone and helping everyone speak for itself on Election Day.
Well, I will say that I have never heard you demean either another candidate, an opponent, or anybody else. And frankly, at the top level, that's not going to change until we have a change at the top. The fact that Army troops were called on standby to have Tiananmen Square in Washington, D.C. And I was really, really encouraged today to see that Washington, D.C. has painted in the streets very large yellow words, Black Lives Matter, by the mayor of Washington. And she has done such a nice job in that regard. And, you know, we don't get the feel in the suburbs as much of the racial divide as exists, or certainly has existed in Minneapolis and other of our cities. But I think that the governor has done a wonderful job. Yeah, Keith Ellison has done a wonderful job of trying to attack these problems, our lieutenant governor as well, to attack these problems and to make sure that everybody feels the pain that the people in the inner cities feel, because it has been horrendous, and it certainly is a black mark on our democracy.
Well, it is, Alan, and I've done an awful lot of listening the last several days as well, both here in our local communities. I've spoken to local pastors throughout the district. I've talked to young Black Minnesotans throughout the district and community leaders. I've also talked to my colleagues on the Congressional Caucus in the U.S. Congress, and you know, it is clear that there are some police reforms that we certainly will be considering at the federal level. But we also, I think, have to take a step back and say systemic racism goes much deeper than that. This is about the fact that Black women die in childbirth 3 times the rate of white women in our country. That's health disparities. It's educational disparities. It's disparities and discrimination in banking and employment. And we have to understand that until we begin to address the grand scope of these issues, that the country will not be able to move forward together in the unity that I know we all, as Minnesota, want the best for our neighbors. So, you know, that's what I'm going to be doing, is listening to my colleagues in the CBC in particular, listening to our community, and working our way through this, because I have seen in these suburbs the last 10 days a community that wants to understand and wants to help their neighbors. You know, this idea that we have moved beyond race in America is just simply not true. And we need to face the history of our country, but we need to be willing to move forward together.
And we need people like yourself who can pitch that to people, especially people of minorities. I was so aggravated this week to hear not only the president, but some of his top advisors talking about the dangers of Antifa and the left. And I have done some research in the last few days, and it's amazing to me that some of the same people who ran over a woman with a car in Charlotte and who were marching really as Nazis, if nothing less, those people have been arrested in the cities. They're not Antifa. The people who had rocks and Molotov cocktails in their car. Yes, there are some bad actors on the left, but there are equally bad actors on the right, if not more bad actors on the right. And we don't get that picture, at least coming from the administration. But fortunately, we have a press that is still free, even though reporters have been unfairly attacked so many times. But it's the free press that really is telling us the truth.
Well, you know, we cannot let political leaders divide us as Americans. And that is what, when you start to blame individuals, or you start to speak in those incendiary terms, that's the purpose. It is there to seek to divide us. You know, I was on a call on a a webcast with Congressman Pete Stauber here in the last few days. And, it's amazing as we talk. There are things we disagree on completely when it comes to policy. But at the end of the day, we agree on more than we disagree on. And so I just think we have got to get back where we can disagree vehemently on policy and what's the right approach, but we can't fight over whether an American or another Minnesotan next to us is good or bad. Because at the end of the day, we are all in this together, and we are going to have to make sure that everyone in our community has a fair shot. And that's all that people I talk to want. They want a good education. They want an opportunity to get a decent job and pay their bills and raise their family and have a good life and be treated fairly. And it doesn't matter who you are, that's what you want. And if you're a minority in this country, a Black American in particular, where you feel like you have not been treated fairly, then we have to listen to that, and we have to listen deeply to understand, is there something from a systemic perspective that is wrong and that we need to address?
And there are so many people on the far right who are used to the fact that this is a white society. I wish that all of them could come back 50 years from now, because they're going to see the complexion change, and change for the better, because this country is really going to move toward the ideals of the democracy, toward the ideals of the founders. And one of my great disappointments is that we have one House of Congress that just has turned its back and will support this president no matter what he does. And it's really shameful, and it's cowardice, and it's disgraceful. And those are the nicest terms I can use. But
well, Alan, and along those same lines, we shouldn't oppose him for the sake of opposition. We all want this president to be successful. We want any president of the United States to be successful. But when everything is framed in us or them terms, in divisive terms, when Mitch McConnell has over 300 bills sitting on his desk that are bipartisan, and he won't bring them forward because he doesn't want to give the Democratic House a win, then America doesn't win. And so I think what I hope is that we realize that because we're all in this together, none of us win unless we all do. And so this is my hope, that out of this level of divisiveness that Minnesotans will see. I've said before, I've made a commitment to this district. When this president is right about something, or his administration, I will support it. Go back to the bill I wrote with Mark Meadows and he signed into law. And when it's not right, when it violates the very core of democracy, of our Constitution, the freedom to peacefully assemble, the freedom of press, the freedom of and from religion, right? The freedom to bring our grievances to our government. When those things are violated, we have a responsibility as Americans to speak out.
And, speaking out has become so easy when you look at how the Constitution has been abused. When you look at helicopters coming down and scaring people on the ground in Washington, D.C., when you see peaceful protesters being tear gassed and driven out of Lafayette Square so that the president could have a photo op, really, really sacrilegiously, standing in front of a church, a very famous and revered church, and holding up a Bible. And I'm sure it's the first time that a Bible has touched his hand ever, as a stage prop, without any concept of the meaning of it or the words of the leaders of religious institutions. We are facing really a terrific, terrific test. This election, and I've said it before, but I really mean it, is more important than any election we have ever had. And we have to restore this country. We have to restore our democracy. And we have the candidates who can do that this year, certainly yourself included.
Well, I appreciate that so much. And, I'm pleased to see some folks, maybe not enough, who are still holding their positions, speaking out against such activity and actions by the president. And again, if the president is doing something to bring this country together, I will stand in support of him. But when you're doing things to divide our country at the very moment when we should be thinking about how do we come together, I mean, just think about the challenges we already are facing with a global pandemic and public health crisis. I really wish the administration would spend time on a supply chain czar for this country so that our brave frontline healthcare workers could have the personal protective equipment that they need to do their job. I wish they would spend time making sure that we had a federal testing and tracing, contact tracing strategy for our nation so that we could limit the economic impact of this pandemic. These are the things that I've asked this administration to do, and frankly, these are the things that I'm focused on. I helped co-found the Supply Chain Caucus in the US Congress before the pandemic hit. I worked in a healthcare manufacturing company for over 20 years. And so who would have thought that the topic of supply chains would end up so sexy in my first term in Congress?
And who would have thought that we would have been so unprepared? Who would have thought that when the Obama administration left a very detailed publication about pandemics, that it would be thrown on the floor and thrown away and never looked at? But, Donald Trump said at one point that he thrives on chaos. And I guess that he thinks that that's what is going to carry him forward. But I see his support slipping, and I think it's going to slip more if he keeps with this personality deficiency that he clearly has. It's not, I think actually if he wasn't president, he would probably be institutionalized, but that's neither here nor there. And I don't expect you to answer to that.
Well, Alan, what I keep thinking about, and there have been so many challenges here in this first 18 months of my service to our community, what I keep thinking about is back to the core and the basics. We've got to figure out how we get to universal health care in this country. And we're in the middle of a public healthcare crisis as we sit here. We've got to make sure that people can afford their prescription drugs. I mean, you've already seen in October of last year, brand name pharma running ads against me, against my reelection. Well, brand name pharma wouldn't be running ads against me if I wasn't standing up to brand name pharma. So, infrastructure investments in our country, we've got to make those. We've got to support our family farmers and build those international markets for them. We've got to support career skills and technical education, and maybe even more so now, because with COVID, the jobs that existed before may not all exist when more than 30 million Americans go back to work.
Let alone the small businesses, which
these small businesses
is really, really hurtful. And the mom and pop stores, which I always preferred to go to a mom and pop store, the little guy, I guess maybe that's why I've always been a Democrat, but it's so important for this country.
That's right, Alan. And I've been working, I'm on the House Committee on Small Business. So one of the privileges, even during this public health crisis, is to be working on making those Paycheck Protection Program loans work better for the small businesses. The SBA, quite candidly, the execution of the rollout of the economic injury disaster loans was a disaster. We've been working to encourage them to have more accountability and to be more transparent and to communicate more with people who have applied for those. And we've been working to help mom and pop shops get access to those PPP loans and then get the program changed so that it actually reflects the situation on the ground, which is most or many of those businesses were shuttered for a period of time. So, in the midst of this, the truth is we've had our head down. We've just been working as hard as we can from a team perspective on serving our constituents.
And, you know, working very hard. And certainly, as I said, the farmers, how are the farmers doing? Because I know they took a terrible hit. And certainly the restrictions between China and the United States, or the tariffs, did not help the farmers. They were supposed to help them. They really hurt them very badly. And that's a large portion of what we stand for.
Well, nobody wins in a trade war. I've said that from the beginning, and America should have been putting pressure on China, but this was the wrong way to go about it, you know, putting it on the backs of family farmers. So the truth is, farmers were starting to feel like, with the market facilitation payments last year that I supported with USMCA, the agreement between Mexico and Canada, getting through some additional beef agreements with Japan, they were starting to feel pretty good. Even dairy was looking much better here. And then, of course, a pandemic hits. So the truth is, our family farmers need help again. You've seen disruptions of food supply chains. You've seen pork producers and turkey growers, you know, have to face this horrible, horrible issue of euthanizing their animals. There's no one who is more upset about this than the farmers who are in the middle of our food supply chain. So, you know, our corn growers, for example, this administration has chosen big oil over our corn growers and our ethanol producers in this nation by continuing to hand out these small refinery waivers, and I'm going to say small with quotation marks. So the truth is, we need to help our biofuels sector here, supported by our family farmers, in a future CARES package, a future HEROES package. And at the end of the day, what I guess upsets me the most is 95% of this congressional district is small family farmers. And I work well with Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue. We have an ongoing conversation and dialogue, but I refuse to accept that consolidation is inevitable and that we just need to let these small farmers go out of business. So as long as I'm in this seat, I'm going to be fighting like hell to make sure that we keep our small family farms in this district.
So much more to talk about, so little time left. Let's make it a business to have you come back. Here we are in the beginning of June, maybe the end of July or August, and continue our discussion. We have so much more to talk about. Always a pleasure, and certainly a role model for anybody who's interested in good government. Angie Craig, Congress, 2nd Congressional District. A pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.